He grabbed my wrist and said my husband's name. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't check how I reacted. He just said Evan's name in a low, rough, steady voice that made me freeze. Then he went on, very slowly. I'm the one who signed the first approval that let him move forward. A sentence with no explanation, but enough to change the air between us. He let go, sat back in his spot, eyes fixed on the street like he just reread an old note in his mind. I didn't answer, didn't ask, didn't show anything. Only one thing was clear. I needed to go back to the mornings before this, when everything was still quieter than it is now. I met him for the first time back when I didn't even know his name. It was a cold morning after a night shift that lasted more than 12 hours at the public hospital. I worked nights as a nurse. The job trains you to observe without falling apart. The moment I stepped outside, the wind hit me hard enough to make my eyes sting, the kind of tired only night shift people understand. He was sitting tucked against the bus stop, his faded coat pulled tight around him. No sign asking for money, no greeting anyone, just sitting there with an empty paper cup in front of him. I had a few small bills in my pocket. I dropped them into the cup. He nodded, didn't say a word. I didn't stay. The next day I did it again, then another day, then many more. Not because I wanted to help someone, just because I got used to reaching into my pocket after my shift ended. A month passed, and I realized he remembered smaller things than anyone else. He remembered when I switched to a different drink because I hadn't felt well the day before. He remembered the morning I walked slower because my leg hurt. He even remembered the day I forgot to tie my hair. He didn't ask. He just watched with the kind of look people have when they've lived too long around things no one wants to look at directly. At that point, I still didn't know his name was Walter, and I still didn't think anything was strange. At home, Evan, my husband, always showed up looking so put together, not a single crease on his shirt was out of place. He works in real estate, great with people, speaks politely, the kind of man who can make anyone believe his whole life is perfectly under control. Evan often told me I shouldn't trust strangers too much, especially people living on the street. He said it gently, never forceful, the kind of tone that makes you think it's just a sincere reminder, not a warning. I usually stayed quiet and listened. I don't talk much, not because I'm scared, just because I'm used to listening more than speaking. One morning, Walter spoke before I could walk away. What line of work is your husband in? The question wasn't shocking enough to startle me, but it wasn't casual enough to ignore either. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the ground, like he was asking only to complete a file he'd been missing a piece of. Real estate, I said. He nodded. No follow-up. A few days later, when I dropped money into the cup and turned to leave, he said, "He used to work in the building on the south side of the city, right?" I stopped. I didn't ask how he knew. I just confirmed it. Yeah, he used to work there. A small nod. Almost nothing. From that day on, the things he said started to come with timelines. Clear, exact. The kind of details only someone inside the system would remember. Things like, around his 3rd year after graduation, he used to leave early. Whenever there was an inspection, he always slipped out first. Not accusations, not complaints, just old facts spoken in the tone they belonged to. That night, when I asked Evan about his old company, he paused for exactly one beat before answering. A beat small enough for most people to ignore, but not small to someone used to tracking every psychological shift in patients like I am. "Why are you asking about that?" he said, still keeping his voice soft. "I just couldn't remember clearly, so I wanted to check." "There's nothing worth talking about," he said. "That place wasn't fair. The good people were the ones who got pushed down." He'd said that line many times, in different versions. It always had the same theme. He was the one on the right side, but he was treated wrong. I was used to hearing it. But the next morning, when Walter said, "I used to be the operations manager in that building," The story opened in a completely different direction. He said it calmly. No purpose, no angle. I just made sure everything ran on time, he went on. And the younger ones, like your husband, they just needed to stay on the right track to get noticed. That was the first time I learned Walter had once held a position higher than what anyone would guess now. Not a director, not someone with big authority, but high enough to see the layers of how things really worked, the parts outsiders never know. I knew him, he added, back when he was still nobody. A sentence with no contempt, no regret, no attempt to bring up his own past, just a statement of fact. On the way home, I realized I wasn't standing still the way I used to. Not because I believed Walter, not because I doubted Evan. It was just the first time the scattered details started lining up into a thin thread. A stranger remembered too much. Someone close remembered too little. No conclusions, no judgments, just a light feeling, like wind sneaking through a cracked door. Something was off. Not big, not loud, but enough for me to know. I wouldn't see the story with the same eyes again. From that morning on, I didn't walk to the bus stop out of habit anymore. I walked there with a clear sense that every detail Walter mentioned was waiting to fall into place. Not because I believed him, but because it was the first time I realized I'd been standing too long in the shadow of the stories Evan told about himself. Walter was still in the same spot, hat pulled low, hands resting at his sides. Nothing looked different, but when I got close, he lifted his head first. His eyes didn't look for pity. They just measured whether I was ready to hear more today. 8 months, Walter said the moment I set the money down. He left the building after 8 months, not even a year. No greeting, no lead-in, no waiting for me to ask. I stood there, my hand still holding the strap of my bag. At that time, the system was under review, he added, and he walked out right before the final week. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why he remembered. Walter answered before I even had time to think. I worked in operations, he said, the things other people don't care about. I had to remember all of them. His voice was flat. No pride, no complaint. Like he was just reading an old schedule straight from memory. That night, when I asked Evan, "How long did you work at your old company?" he set his phone down and looked at me a little longer than usual. "Why are you suddenly interested in that?" The question was soft, but had a thin line of tension under it. "I just forgot the timeline," I said. "It was about a year, right?" Evan frowned. Around that. Around that. Not clear. I didn't mention that Walter had said 8 months. I just stayed quiet. Evan switched the topic in under 10 seconds, talking about sales numbers, difficult clients, and how he always does everything right, but still gets picked apart. I realized I'd heard that line more times than I remembered. I do things right, but people like to push me down. I get put in tough spots. I never get the credit I deserve. Those lines used to pass through my ears so naturally. Now they lined up, repeating like an audio clip played on a loop every day. The next morning, Walter spoke first. "What did he tell you?" "Not much," I said. I figured. Walter bent one finger slightly, like he was recalculating something. Back then, the people who left at the right moment always said the same kind of things. I didn't react. I didn't want him to think I was starting to believe him. Walter stared at the empty space in front of him. "I once thought he was better than the others," he said. "Because he kept his mouth shut. Never loud, never asking for favors." "But?" I asked. Walter adjusted his knit hat like he needed a few more seconds. "But when responsibility showed up," he said, "he was always the first to disappear." A simple line. No accusation. I didn't ask if he had anything against Evan, because Walter's voice didn't hold a trace of emotion that would point that way. He spoke like someone repeating data correctly. not someone trying to reclaim justice for himself. That night, Evan told a story about an old meeting, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. A coworker, according to him, had stolen credit and pinned the mistakes on him. He told it smoothly, the way he always did, but this time I was listening with the ears of someone who'd been handed 2 extra pieces of information from somewhere else. "Why did you leave that company?" I asked. He paused for a beat. "Didn't fit. Office politics." There it was again. "Did you leave before or after the inspection?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound as normal as possible. Evan looked at me, long enough that I could see him sorting through which answer would keep things calm. "How do you know there was an inspection?" he asked back. I didn't answer. Didn't mention Walter. Didn't want him thinking I was bringing someone else into this. "I don't remember stuff like that," Evan said, slipping back into his soft tone. "I just remember they didn't know how to value the people who actually worked." I nodded, not agreeing, just noting that this was always the endpoint of every story Evan told about any place he walked away from. One morning, I arrived later than usual. Walter didn't look at me the way he normally did. He just said that day he was the last one to leave the floor. I tilted my head slightly. "What do you mean?" Walter folded his hands in front of his chest, like he was reviewing old data. When the inspection started, everyone had to sign off on the operating system, except him. He said he wasn't part of that team anymore. I didn't react, didn't show surprise. I only asked, "Did you talk to him?" "Once," Walter said. I reminded him he needed to leave a note. He said, "I'm not responsible for anything here anymore." There was no dramatic tone in that moment, only weight. "I know what you're thinking," Walter said, "but I'm not telling you this so you'll dislike him." "I know," I said. "I'm telling you because you should know what he was like before he had anything in his hands." I stayed still. Walter didn't look at me. He just sat the way he always did, his hand resting lightly on his knee. On the way home, I realized I wasn't trying to protect any version of Evan in my mind anymore. Not because I trusted Walter more, but because what he said matched the things Evan always avoided. Timelines, responsibility, and the line between "I did everything" and "I had nothing to do with it." I hadn't concluded anything yet. I wasn't angry yet. There was just one clear feeling. Cracks don't come from one big hit. They come from small details repeating, the way Walter remembered timelines, the way Evan dodged questions, the way they told the same period of his life in 2 completely different versions. I reached the door. Evan was on the phone, his voice raised a little. "I did my part," he said. "They just picked the wrong person to trust." I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, didn't step in right away, not because I was hesitant, but because I knew, from here on, every sentence would start to mean something different. Not loudly, not as a conclusion, just that. I'd begun looking directly at the things I used to walk past. I didn't sleep deeply during those days, not because I was afraid of what might happen, just because my mind was working slowly but nonstop, like a heart monitor that refused to shut off. I had spent years trying to look past Evan. Now I was starting to look directly at the parts I'd always skipped over. The next morning, I walked to the corner earlier than usual. Walter was already there. Not leaning back, not slumped forward. His posture was more alert than on any other day, like he'd decided that today he wouldn't hold anything back. I set the money down. "What else do you remember?" I asked, my voice steady, no circling around. Walter didn't look at me right away. He took off his knit hat, set it on his knee, then said, "Not remember more. Remember correctly." I stayed quiet, waiting. "Back then," Walter began, "there was a set of files that didn't match. Not big, but big enough that if anyone dug into it, it would pull several levels into the mess." I didn't gasp. I just kept my eyes on his face. "Evans signed one of them," Walter said. "A small signature, but a signature in the wrong place. There was no criticism in his voice, just a description of an action. He wasn't the one who created the problem, he went on, but he shifted the responsibility to another group so he could pull himself out. And when trouble showed up, he said he wasn't part of that department anymore. I remembered Evan's expression every time he talked about being blamed by others. It always had one thing in common. He never mentioned his own part. Walter continued, I reported it, because I thought the system could still be fixed if everyone claimed the part that was theirs. He breathed out softly, not because he was tired, but because he was remembering a time when he still believed responsibility could be clear. I signed the final confirmation, he said, because I was the operations manager. I was responsible for everything that happened in my area. I heard cars passing behind me. The morning wind was cold, but not enough to break my focus. When everything blew up, Evan had already moved to another team. When the investigation started, he wasn't on the main list. No one looked for him. No one asked. A short pause. He walked away clean. I asked, What about you? Walter didn't change his tone. I lost my job. I didn't offer condolences. I didn't say, I understand. Those lines didn't fit the way Walter told his story. I'm not telling you this so you'll think he's a bad person, Walter added. Only so you know who he used to be. I nodded. Thank you. Walter put his hat back on. You don't have to believe me, he said. Just pay attention to the timelines. I walked away without looking back, not because I wanted to end the story, but because I needed space to line up everything I'd heard. That night, Evan was watching the news when I walked out of the bathroom. He looked at me, then back at the screen like he could sense something in the air had shifted, but couldn't tell what it was. I sat down in the chair across from him. What month did you leave your old company? I asked. The question had no emotion, no accusation. It was just a line-checking information. Evan frowned slightly. June, why are you asking about that? Just want to get it right. My voice was steady, cool, effortless. Around September or October, he said. I don't remember exactly. I looked straight at him. There was an investigation then. Did you leave before or after it? Evan stopped completely. No answer. No quick comeback. He just looked at me with eyes that weren't defensive or angry, but carried a caution I had never seen on his face before. The silence lasted about 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds were enough for me to understand there was something he didn't want to touch. June, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. That stuff happened a long time ago. I don't think about it anymore. I'm asking about the timing, I said, not the feelings. Evan closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them again. I don't remember. A short line, no extra explanation. I didn't ask again, didn't push. It was just clear that if someone had really been hurt by injustice, they always remembered every mark, every detail, every mismatch. The memory of someone who'd been wronged doesn't fade that easily. Evan shifted into talking about a client he was meeting tomorrow. His tone changed fast, like someone used to switching channels to avoid static. I watched him talk. I saw his mouth move, his hands illustrate the situation. But my mind wasn't focused on what he was saying. I was listening to the distance in his voice, the shift that happened whenever he needed to leave a topic he couldn't control. When he paused to take a drink of water, I asked one last question. Did you ever sign off on something for someone else? Evan set the glass on the table. His eyes flickered once, faster than usual. June, what do you want me to confess to? Not anger, not fear, just someone trying to keep a story from moving. I don't want you to confess anything, I said. I just want to know what you did. Evan looked at the table, then at me. Then he stood up. I'm tired, he said. Let's not talk about this anymore. It wasn't a refusal to answer. It was a selective retreat, the exact kind Walter had described. I stayed there by myself. The house was quiet, but not the familiar kind of quiet. It was the kind of quiet a room has after its glossy outer coat has been stripped off, revealing the small cracks underneath. In my head, the details lined up. Walter didn't blame anyone. Evan didn't remember the timelines. And when faced with questions, he changed the subject like a reflex. I wasn't accusing Evan. I wasn't defending Walter. I just knew one thing. Evan didn't leave his old company because of injustice. He left because he knew he could walk away without paying a price. And that moment he froze at my question. No yelling, no excuse, revealed a truth even clearer than anything Walter had said. Evan moved up by avoiding where he needed to stand, and the person who stayed was the one who lost his footing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. It was just that the picture had become too clear to ever look at it with my old eyes again. I sat there for a long time after Evan went into the bedroom, not to decide whether he was right or wrong. I just needed to put the timelines back in their real order. And when I did that, I realized none of the details stayed where Evan had placed them. The next morning, I didn't go to the corner right away. I went straight home, changed clothes, opened my laptop. Public records from old companies were easier to find than I expected. Just a few HR reports, a few leaked internal memos, a few old posts people forgot to delete, and everything lined up. Evan switched teams the exact week the inspection happened. Evan left the company in the exact month Walter said. Evan wasn't on the list of people held for follow-up after the internal review. And in the employee notice, there was a small line. The operations department is responsible for the final verification. I stared at that line for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed Walter had been standing in the right place at the worst possible moment. I closed the laptop, sat up straight. Nothing in me felt tangled, no pain, no disappointment, just a clear understanding. I lived inside a story with only one side for far too long. That night, Evan came home late. He dropped his keys on the table and let out a long breath like the whole city had settled onto his shoulders. They gave me something that isn't my responsibility again, he said as soon as he sat down. It's always like that. I'm always the one fixing other people's mistakes. I looked at him. At the way he told the story and the exact structure he always used, he was right. Others were wrong. The system was unfair. Before, I would have nodded, but tonight I let the story fall between us without touching it. Evan glanced over, noticing I didn't react. Are you not listening to me? I'm listening, I said. I'm just letting you finish. He hesitated. Did I say something wrong? I didn't say you did. My voice stayed calm. I just want to ask, in the stories you tell, where is your part of the responsibility? Evan blinked. Why are you asking like I'm the one causing everything? I didn't say you caused anything, I replied. I'm only asking about your part. The air in the room shifted, not into a storm, but into a colder, tighter layer. Where did you hear this? Evan asked, his voice lower this time. I looked at public records, I said. I compared the timelines. Evan stood up. June, you're turning small things into something unnecessary. Maybe, I said, but you're dodging the question. He turned away, bracing a hand on the counter like he needed it to stay steady. Why are you doubting me like this? Not anger. Just an attempt to pull the conversation back into the familiar victim frame he always used. I'm not doubting you, I said. I'm just not filling in the blanks for you anymore. Evan went silent. He didn't come closer. He didn't walk away. He just stood there, like someone who'd been stopped on the road without knowing what rule he'd broken. I continued. You left your old company the exact week of the inspection. You signed a file that wasn't part of your team. And when the investigation started, your name wasn't on the list for questioning. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I just put the facts on the table. Cold, flat, without any emotion added. Do you want to tell your part of it? The last question, not to force a confession, just to give him a chance to look at himself. Evan didn't answer. He only shook his head once, small and heavy. I understood. That was the answer. The next morning, I went back to the corner. Walter wasn't there. I looked up and down the street. There was no sign he had ever sat in that spot for months. The empty space was so bare, I had to stand still for a few seconds to be sure I hadn't gone to the wrong place. I came back the next day, and the day after that, Walter stayed gone as if he had never existed. No goodbye, no final note. He just stepped out of the story at the exact moment he'd given everything he meant to give, with no need to stay and see where it would go. That night, Evan tried to tell me another story about a coworker, another familiar story about being pushed into a tough spot, being used, being undervalued. I let him talk, and when he stopped to wait for my reaction, I said, "Are you sure you're always the one who gets hurt?" Evan looked at me like I'd suddenly changed into someone else. "Whose side are you on?" "I'm on the side of the truth," I said. "Not yours, not anyone's, just the truth." A silence dropped between us like a brand new cut. Evan looked down at his hands. For the first time, he had no story to offer, no one to blame, nowhere to walk away to. And that was the breaking point. Not because I'd won, not because I'd brought him down, but because for the first time, the one retreating from the story wasn't me. I sat down on the sofa. I didn't look at him. I didn't explain. I didn't comfort. The balance didn't shift because I talked more. It shifted because I wasn't afraid of the gaps in his stories anymore. In my mind, Walter's image appeared again. He didn't talk much. He didn't ask to be understood. He didn't try to earn sympathy. He just gave me the one piece I needed. And then he disappeared, like someone who knew his part was done. I looked straight at the window, at the streetlights reflecting on the glass. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but I knew one thing. I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. I didn't leave the marriage that night. I just started pulling myself back, not with anger, not with silent pressure, but with a clarity that made everything sharp. Sharp enough that nothing needed to be argued. Evan tried to keep things normal. He told stories the same way as before, stories about how he was always put in difficult positions. But this time, every sentence he said fell between us like a stone hitting a still surface without leaving a ripple. I didn't contradict him, but I wasn't standing on his side anymore. A few days later, Evan asked, "Do you still trust me?" I looked straight at him. "I trust what matches the truth." He didn't say anything else. No yelling, no pleading, just a silence, like someone watching the piece they'd been standing on finally pull out from under them. I packed my things on a very quiet morning. No noise, no slamming, no tears. I just put each of my belongings into the suitcase, in order, in the right spaces. That calm didn't match the kind of breakup people imagine. It didn't shatter. It just stopped. Evan stood in the doorway, one shoulder resting against the frame. "You really want to go?" "I don't want to stay somewhere every story only has one side," I said. "And I don't believe you want to change anymore." He took a deep breath, then said the line I'd heard so many times. "I tried my best." "Maybe that's the problem," I said. "Your best is only used to walk away from trouble, not to stay and face it." No raised voice, no accusation, just a truth that had reached the point where it couldn't be avoided anymore. I pulled my suitcase toward the door. Evan didn't stop me, not because he respected my decision, but because he no longer had a story left to lean on. I rented a small room near the hospital. 3 days later, I went back to the corner where Walter used to sit. The sky was gray, the wind was soft, Everything looked so ordinary that if not for the old paper cup still sitting in the trash nearby, I might have believed Walter had never existed. I stood there for a long time, not to wait for him, just to acknowledge that some people pass through your life exactly the way they're meant to, quietly, at the right moment, without needing to promise they'll return. I took a small envelope from my pocket. There wasn't any money inside. I knew Walter didn't need that kind of gesture. Just a folded piece of paper with a short line. Thank you for saying the part others chose to hide. I slipped the envelope into the gap between the bus stop bench and the metal post. Anyone could find it. If it was Walter, good. If not, that was fine too. The gratitude had already been sent. I straightened up and looked at the stretch of road I used to walk every morning with a tired mind. Now it felt quieter. Not because life had gotten easier, but because I no longer let anyone arrange the story for me. I never heard anything more about Walter. No one around that area knew where he went. No one questioned it much. People like him disappear from a city's map the same way they lived in it, without noise, without footprints. But I knew he didn't disappear for nothing. He once held a position higher than Evan, then lost it because he took responsibility. Evan moved up quickly, then stood unsteady because he avoided it. And me? I just needed to wake up, and that alone was enough to step out of the pull of both men. I went back to my night shifts with a different mindset. I didn't change the world. I just changed where I stood in it, and that was enough to make everything feel lighter. A coworker asked why I seemed calmer than before. I just smiled. I stepped out of a story that no longer fit me. No need to explain more. That night, before my shift, I passed the bus stop again. The envelope was still there. No one had taken it. No one cared. I looked at it, then at the empty space where Walter used to sit. Some people show up at the exact moment you need the missing piece. Some people spend their whole lives hiding the part they don't want anyone to see. And some people stand between those two, needing only a small nudge to know which direction to turn. I walked on, not waiting for anything behind me, not hoping anyone would come back. Self-respect isn't loud. It's just a steady step when you leave a place you no longer belong to. I went to my night shift like always, but this time there wasn't any empty space inside me that needed filling. I'd given the misplaced power back to the right person. I'd kept the clarity for myself, and I knew I'd won, not by revenge, but by standing tall and then walking away. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening.